He told me that he tried to get into the house and cut the telephone line.
Our story begins in a suburb of Largo, Florida. A mother asleep in her home wakes to a masked man standing over her. The man had a knife in one hand and an axe in the other. Noticing that the woman had seen him, he began stabbing and striking her. Realizing that this person was trying to kill her, the woman attempted to defend herself while crying out, "What are you doing here? What are you doing? Honey, help me, please." Her husband, who was asleep on the other side of the bed, wakes up and begins fighting with the attacker. Meanwhile, in another room, her 12-year-old son, Jason, is awoken by the sound of a struggle going on in the hallway. As he steps through his bedroom doorway and into the hallway, he instantly realizes his beloved stepfather, Keith Yunk, is in a life-and-death struggle for survival. A man much larger than Keith, dressed head to toe in dark clothing with a ski mask on, is stabbing Keith. In a state of fear and unable to help in the situation, he watches as a masked man repeatedly plunges the knife in and out of Keith. In Jason's words, "I saw the person in the hallway's eyes. He had murder in his eyes. The person in the hallway was there to kill." Jason notices his mother, Anita, just feet away. She is covered in blood and bleeding out of several places on her body. He watches as Anita picks up a baseball bat and strikes the intruder with it. He then hears Keith yell, "Get the gun! Get the gun!" The intruder then grabs Keith and throws him back into his bedroom, where he lands across the bed. The intruder turned and ran down the hallway, followed by the front door slamming. After feeling confident that the man was gone, Jason and his mother ran to the door and locked it. Jason turned to his mother and told her, "I'll call 911. He picked up the phone, dialed 911, and put it to his ear. There was no dial tone. He tells his mother that the phone is dead. She looked at him and told him to stay there with Keith. She then unlocked and left out the front door in search of help. Jason locked the door behind her.
Largo 911, can we help you?
Largo, we're also responding.
My neighbor is beat up at my door.
Ma'am,
Bloody and beat up.
ma'am, do you have any idea of what happened?
Anita, tell me what happened. Her throat's been cut. Please hurry, this is important.
All right. Paramedics are responding. The police will be out there shortly.
2 officers out on patrol respond to the call of a battery in progress. They have no idea of the gravity and the enormity of the horrific crime they were about to encounter. Arriving at the neighbor's home, they find Anita covered in blood from severe stab wounds. They do their best to treat her as an ambulance arrives. Meanwhile, inside the Yunk home, with his 2 younger siblings still sleeping, Jason is reeling from the violence he's awoken to. Jason heads to his parents' room where Keith lies, sprawled across the bed, covered in blood. Jason recalls an injury across Keith's side that was so bad that his insides were coming out. Jason held his hand and was looking into his eyes as Keith took a big breath. When he let it out, he was gone. Jason said that he could feel him leave. He laid Keith's hand down and walked out of the room with nowhere to go. He walked down the hallway and saw red and blue lights shining through the front window. The officers leave Anita in the care of paramedics. As the first officers on the scene approach the home, Jason runs out to them. He grabbed and hugged them. One officer states that she could see the terror on his face. He made a stabbing motion with his hand. As the crowd begins to gather, a medevac helicopter lands in the neighbor's front yard, called by the EMTs who are struggling to stem the blood from the deep stab wounds to Anita's neck, shoulder, and chest. As instructed by a supervisor, that same first responding officer boarded the aircraft and stayed with Anita. Not knowing whether his mother will survive the attack, Jason is left in the care of neighbors as additional law enforcement pulls up to the residence. As detectives arrive on the scene, Uniform Patrol have already secured the scene. They inform detectives that the whereabouts or identity of a suspect was unknown. As detectives approach the front door, the first thing they see is blood evidence on the exterior walkway. Not far inside the door was a baseball bat. Bloody stains were found on the handle and blood smears coated the inside of the door. There was blood spatter everywhere, covered the walls, door, floor, pieces of furniture, and then led into the master bedroom. They could see Keith lying on the master bed. He is head to toe covered in blood. Because of the nature of the scene, there's no reason to go any further into the room until crime scene personnel arrive and begin their investigation. Awaiting the arrival of crime scene technicians, investigators quickly realize there's 2 young children still in the home, sleeping soundly. 4-year-old Nick recalls waking up to a flashlight in his eyes. It was a police officer. He picked Nick up and put him over his shoulder. However, the officer didn't cover his eyes. So on their way out, Nick saw his stepfather, who he believed to be sleeping. He wondered why there was a bunch of red paint everywhere and when he would wake up from this weird dream. With the 3 children safe and sound, investigators process the crime scene. Though they don't find a murder weapon, they do notice a number of key pieces of evidence. During the search of the exterior of the residence, they found that the exterior phone lines coming into the home had been cut. It looked as though a knife blade had cut the phone line rather than a pair of wire cutters or snips. The cut was most likely intentional. Who would come to this residence at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday while this family was asleep in their home, cut the phone line, and then enter the home and attack the adults in the master bedroom? To answer that question, investigators desperately want to talk to Keith's wife, Anita, who was also savagely attacked, but she's barely clinging to life and has been medevaced to a local trauma center. The officer who went with Anita to the hospital said that she had never seen anything so gory in her life. She said that it was straight out of a horror movie. The officer had a hard time communicating with Anita as she was barely coherent. Anita didn't say much, but the officer wrote down everything that she said. She asked multiple times where her husband was and if her children were okay. The officer asked her if she recognized the suspect. Anita said that she had never seen the man before and that she didn't recognize anything about him. However, she informs the officer about the phone lines being cut. She advised the officer that the phone lines had also been cut a couple of months prior. That was the end of their conversation. One of the significant pieces of information they were looking for was who was the initial focus of the attack, Anita or Keith. Investigators need to talk with the only other surviving eyewitness to the murder, Anita's eldest son, 12-year-old Jason, who has been at the neighbor's home since the police arrived on the scene. Detectives asked Jason to describe the intruder, so he told them that the man had gloves on and a ski mask. There was a gap between the mask and his shirt. He could see the man's skin, which he believed to be black. Jason told investigators that the attacker was a muscular black male of medium height. Detectives learned another thing from Jason. He says that the intruder never said a word during the entire attack. This could indicate that perhaps somebody would recognize their voice. The investigators dig into the family dynamic to learn more about the Yunks and who may have wanted one or more of them dead. Anita was a stay-at-home mom that did some bookkeeping and accounting work on the side. Keith was a formerly married air conditioning technician who was regarded as a dependable hard worker. Detectives learned that Anita, like Keith, had been previously married. She had a 10-year marriage to a man named Luther Bass. They had been divorced for around 6 months before Keith and Anita got married. Anita and Keith only dated for a few weeks before getting married, but Jason states that they had a very genuine relationship. He said that Keith would handle any problems and take care of the family. He said that Keith was always in a great mood and always tried to help others. When the couple married in July of 1991, Keith moved into Anita's already crowded home. Along with Jason are younger siblings, Rachel, Rebecca, and Nicholas. Joining them are now Keith's 2 kids, ages 3 and 5. According to Jason, Keith had the attitude of the more the merrier, more people for him to play with and have fun with. By the end of 1991, right before Christmas, Keith and Anita are thrilled with their new life together and decide to enjoy themselves. Saturday, December 14th, 1991. That evening, Anita and Keith went on a date together. Keith's kids were with their mom that weekend, so it was just Anita's 3 kids at home. Jason was babysitting everyone. When his parents got home, they were very pleased that he had kept the house together and nothing had happened. Jason remembers Keith pulling him in and saying, "I'm very proud of you and I love you," and then gave him a big hug. Now, just a few hours after that loving embrace, Jason's childhood is irreparably shattered. As Jason and his siblings are tended to by their neighbors and then grandparents, investigators want to know who could have caused such devastation. In the initial hours of the investigation, detectives learn that both Keith and Anita have ex-spouses. Luther, Anita's ex, lived over 2,500 miles away in Boise, Idaho. He works as a firefighter. They find out that Linda, Keith's ex, and her husband are living locally in Largo. So they contact Linda and advise her of Keith's death. She was upset and crying when she heard the information. She alibied herself and her husband. They were reportedly both at home, sleeping. They denied any involvement in the murder. Though Linda and her current husband claimed they were sleeping during the attack, the detectives hear something concerning. Linda had a discussion with Keith about where their children were going to spend the holidays, and it created some animosity between the two. In addition to the arguments, Linda was upfront that she had spoken to legal counsel just a day or so prior to the murder, and acknowledged that she had planned to seek a child custody arrangement different than what had existed at the time. Matter of fact, the day following the murder, Linda was scheduled to meet with an attorney to file some court motions. Even though they had a suspect description of a black male, detectives don't have any association of a black male with this family. There were no obvious weapons left at the scene, and officers were still searching the surrounding area. The fact that Linda's kids were not in the home at the time of the attack was something investigators took note of. Was that planned, or was that a last-minute change in the schedule? Keith was in his early 20s when he met his first wife, Linda. They got married and had 2 children. After 4 years of marriage, Keith and Linda fell out of love. Keith was granted custody of their 2 children. As the detectives continue their questioning of Linda, they also pursue Anita's ex, Luther Bass. Largo police contact a detective at the Boise Police Department. They inform him that they had had a homicide of a male and an attempted homicide of a female that was in surgery and probably not going to survive, and that her husband is a Boise firefighter by the name of Luther Bass. The Boise detective found out where Luther was working, living, and who he was living with. He contacted Luther's girlfriend, Connie Inbusk, and learned that Luther was out hunting in an area roughly 1 hour from Boise. He had left Saturday morning. The detectives asked her about her relationship with Luther, and she said that he was outstanding. She reports that he was very loving and caring. The Boise detective was getting no indication of Luther being a suspect. Connie's statement of Luther going hunting was in line for that time of year in Idaho. It's not unusual for somebody to go by themselves hunting, but with the seriousness of the crime, the detective felt the urgency to locate Luther and eliminate him as a suspect. The detective contacted his partner, who's a pilot and owns a plane. They conducted aerial surveillance over the area in which Luther's girlfriend Connie said that he was hunting. They searched for roughly 2 hours, flying very close to the ground. However, they were unable to locate Luther. The Boise detective stationed a patrol car outside of Luther's home. When he arrives Sunday night at 7 p.m., 16 hours after the attack in Florida, officers invite him down to the police station.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Your wife was assaulted last night. She was stabbed several times by an intruder who broke into her house. She's still alive at this point, however, she's undergone major surgery all day today. Her current husband was killed by the attacker. And your 12-year-old boy watched the whole thing. So, what questions do you have with her?
The biggest one is I just want to see how my kids are. But Jason wasn't hurt either.
No, they saw through the open door. It's pretty horrifying for the child.
So evidently, since you're asking all me all this, they didn't catch anybody.
No, do you know anybody that would do this to your wife?
No.
During the interview, Luther never asked about Anita's condition.
Do you have any problem with us taking a look inside your pickup?
Go look yourself.
Though Luther accommodates every request, it's his timeline of events that has investigators most curious.
They're still concerned about your whereabouts between Saturday and Sunday, because realistically, you could jump a plane and fly back there Saturday. This could have happened at 3 o'clock this morning. You could have flown back here because you told your wife you wasn't going to be back till 7 o'clock or a little after. Which was right on time.
I left yesterday morning. Okay, 7 o'clock I got up.
Okay?
Okay, yesterday morning. Pat Weber drew me this map of where his little secret, hiding place is. And he said there's a bunch of does in there and all that.
Luther methodically describes his hunting trip, providing detectives with as much information about locations and timings as possible.
I got out and walked around there, but I didn't see nothing, didn't get to shoot nothing. But the sunset was great from there, and the sunset was like 5:30 or so.
Luther allowed investigators to search his truck, take pictures of his clothing, and search his clothing. According to the detective, he gave every answer that an innocent person usually does. Luther's cooperative and direct responses, plus the fact that he didn't fit the physical description of the killer, works in his favor. Still, the detective knows there's no one to confirm Luther's movements once he leaves his fiancée, Connie.
So for me to appease these investigators in Florida, there's absolutely no way you could have went to Florida yesterday and came back.
No.
Detectives go through Luther's phone records and credit card statements to determine if he had purchased an airline ticket to Florida. On Monday morning, 28 hours after Keith Yunk's murder, and with Anita still teetering between life and death due to her devastating injuries, investigators in Largo get their first break in the case. Detectives were notified that less than a mile away from the crime scene, a mask and glove were found on a golf course. There were bloodstains on both items. The mask and glove are sent out for testing, hoping one of them will lead them to a suspect. And just hours after those items are found, another lead turns up when a group of college kids reaches out to law enforcement. They had been standing out on the driveway of one of the boys' houses a block away from the crime scene. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, the same time that the crime would have been occurring. They saw an individual running, wearing what they described as a jogging outfit. The individual apparently stopped jogging, walked for a moment, and then as he passed the 3 college students, started to run again, and then began to run faster in the direction of the golf course. They could see with the street lighting that it was not a black male. This was a big development that changed the direction of the investigation. Detectives wonder if there is a person with a motive that would match Jason's description, but is in fact a white male, not a black male. One person comes into sharp focus for the investigators: Luther Bass, Anita's ex-husband. Detectives want to determine whether there was anything that could link Luther Bass to the ski mask. Though Luther has given a sample of his hair to detectives, the lab is still working on a full forensic analysis of the mask and glove. On Tuesday, December 17th, 60 hours since Keith's murder and Anita's violent attack, there's another huge development in the case. After multiple surgeries, Anita Yunk survives. Anita provides a statement of her account, which helps detectives build a second-by-second timeline of the attack. Understanding who the intended target was will let them get one step closer to the killer. With Luther's alibi already in question, detectives ask Anita to share the backstory of their relationship. Anita met Luther at church. She said that he seemed like a great guy and that he would make a great husband and father. At the time, Anita was a single mother of 2-year-old Jason, but nothing could dim Luther's interest in Anita. After a short courtship, the couple married in 1981 and soon had more children. But the good times wouldn't last. A decade into their marriage, after a failed boat building business, the couple files for bankruptcy and their relationship falls apart. To salvage their finances, Luther switches careers, deciding to become a firefighter. But the only open position he finds is all the way in Boise, Idaho. Anita and Luther come up with an arrangement. He would go to Boise and work for 6 months and see if he liked living in Boise and being a fireman, while she stayed with the kids in Florida. And after the 6 months, if everything was going well in Boise, Anita and the kids would move there. The truth is, though, Anita never planned on following through. Instead, a year later, and still in Florida with the kids, she files divorce papers. In court, the judge awards Luther only 2 weeks of supervised visitation per year. Just as quickly as Anita files for divorce, she meets a 31-year-old named Keith Yunk at a networking event called Parents Without Partners. Anita and Keith's quick marriage, combined with the pain of her divorcing him and getting full custody of their kids, doesn't sit well with Luther. 2 months after Anita married Keith, Luther drives more than 40 hours from Idaho to Florida to take his kids on a short vacation with Anita's consent. Luther showed up in a camper with his girlfriend and her son. He never said anything about bringing Connie or her son. That caused some concern for Anita. She believed that Luther was going to kidnap the kids, so the situation got heated very quickly. Anita refuses to release their children for the weekend and threatens to call Largo police unless Luther leaves her property. Luther was only there for 2 hours before he was ultimately ordered to leave by Anita. He makes the long journey back to Boise. What could have possibly been going through his head for those 4 days of traveling back to Boise? This made detectives believe that if Luther committed the crime, his motive would probably be the children. As they wait for the police to make progress in the investigation, 2 days before Christmas, Anita and the rest of Keith's family say their goodbyes to a beloved father and stepfather. A few weeks after Keith's memorial service in January of 1992, the forensics on the ski mask come back from the lab. Detectives had high hopes that Luther's hair would be in the ski mask. However, no hair consistent with Luther was found. The fact that it could not be connected to him did not eliminate him as a suspect. Detectives investigate leads pertaining to other suspects, but they are left with dead ends. Keith's murder is becoming a cold case. On March 5, 1992, almost 3 months after Keith Yunk's murder, detectives get the break they needed. Halfway across the country, Luther Bass's fiancée, Connie, tells detectives in Idaho that she has something to share. Largo detectives board a plane the next morning to Boise. Connie tells detectives about an incident from June of last year, 6 months before the murder.
One weekend he told me that he was going to go up in the mountains and go for a bike ride. And he ended up not being in the mountains on a bike ride. He came home on a Sunday. He said, "I'm not going to lie to you anymore, baby." So I went to Florida. And I says, "What did you go to Florida for?" He told me that he tried to get into the house and cut the telephone on.
Connie's story answers a question that has perplexed investigators since Anita's initial statement. Who had mysteriously cut the phone lines back in June?
Luther told me that he could kill Anita and have no regret about it. So what was going through my head was he was probably going down there and see if he could kill Anita.
Did he have anything to say about Anita's new husband?
He didn't really know him all that much. He said that if he can sleep with the enemy, he can die with the enemy.
Connie provides detectives with information that Luther had in fact gone to Salt Lake City on the weekend of the homicide in Florida and had used an alias with a fake social security number that he had got from another fireman. He went to the Salt Lake City airport where he boarded and flew to Tampa. Though Connie's interview with the police implicates her fiancé in Keith's death, and even though investigators haven't been able to corroborate his hunting alibi, the detectives know it still may not be enough to get Luther convicted in a court of law. Only one thing will likely put Luther Bass behind bars: a confession.
Luther Bass, Mike Short.
Nice to meet you, Luther.
Howdy.
Appreciate you coming down here.
They sure didn't give me a choice, man. They had guns and I didn't.
What did you hear about what happened in Largo?
From who?
Anybody?
The first person I talked to in Florida, I guess, was Grandma Raleigh. Pauline said that Jason saw a big black guy, throw Keith across the room.
Detectives wanted to see if he would mention the ski mask, the phone lines, or other withheld evidence that only the killer would know. They show him a picture of the ski mask.
You ever seen it before?
No, sure.
You have one like that?
Sure.
Anything close to that?
Have a written one.
Because detectives know that the kids would have been the motive behind the murder, they show Luther a letter that was written by one of his daughters.
I don't show it to you to upset you, okay? I show it to you because your kids are all confused right now.
The letter had a drawing of 2 hearts, one of which was broken.
You didn't make it my day any better. Yeah, I got a bad letter from Rachel.
Detectives can see that Luther's getting emotional, teary-eyed, and so they make their move.
Luther, I'm going to ask you a very appropriate pointed question, okay? Have you ever been on an airplane out of Florida other than a divorce from here?
Yes, sir.
We know.
So what are we doing?
We know.
We know about Salt Lake City. We know about everything. We just want to give your kids the benefit of knowing why their dad kind of made a mistake.
I know who they are. And I know how much I love them too.
I know you love your kids.
That's what this is all about.
Exactly.
Damn straight.
That's what you did. Although you know it wasn't right. I know you got reasons. damn good reasons. He was screwed over by an ex-wife, by the courts, everybody else down there. You have a chance. But it's over. Throw in the flag. Get it off your chest. There's a reason why you did what you did.
Nail straight to his.
Detectives take his side in the hopes that he would continue talking. Detectives then talk with Luther about the state of the Yunk's home and how it looked like a mess.
And I do know what that house looked like.
I know.
And that's what pushed me over the edge. I walked in that backyard 3 times. When I walked to the back door, I went, my kids don't need to live like this. It wasn't like I got pissed one weekend and said, I'm going to Florida to kill her, okay?
You're right.
I planned on pulling it off, bringing my kids up here and let Connie and my kids and Dusty live together in a nice house and live happily forever after.
Luther proceeds to tell them everything.
Because when I got in the house, I was in the house for 20 minutes, easy. I mean, that was just cool. But I was like, my intensity level, my adrenaline was flowing, and I was like, I had looked in all the kids' bedrooms and I shut their doors. And I saw my Boise Fire Department hat hanging on Jason's bed, and that was just like, do you really want to do this? And I said, I got to. This sucks. And I had, well, you know what I had. I had my knife, my axe. It was a tool that I was comfortable with that could do the job.
What was the job you were there to do?
Kill Anita.
Okay, not Keith.
No, I had nothing against Keith. But you made your bed, now you're gonna die in it. And I was right there by the bed, and I even stood there for like, it seemed like 30 seconds, but it was probably 5. And she rolled over, and she went, huh? And I went like that, right across her coat. And I don't even know if it cut her. Did it cut her? Yeah. That really bad?
Pretty bad. Pretty bad. Yeah.
And that really wasn't enough to kill her, so then when he started to get up, I thought that I could injure him. That was my first intent. Kill her, injure him, he'd be okay. But I hit him like 3 times and he still kept coming at me.
Hit him when he hit him with
the axe. And I was like, damn it, just fall down and pass out, you know? But he kept coming and kept coming. Then Anita got a bat or I don't know, some piece of wood or something, and she cracked me in the skull. And I actually went dizzy for about 2 seconds. And I went, don't you blow it. And then Keith said, get the gun. That's why I left. I had jogging everything on. I was supposed to look like a dolphin nut out there. There was 2 kids there, and I was like, what the hell are these kids doing at 3 o'clock in the morning?
The mask and the glove were sitting on a golf course.
They were on the golf course? How in the hell did I forget that?
Luther then stole a bike from a home near the golf course, pedaled 6 miles to St. Petersburg Airport, hopped on the only flight back to Salt Lake City, and made it home to Idaho in time to see Connie exactly when his hunting trip should have ended.
You didn't think there was any other way to take care of this problem? No.
Luther showed no remorse. The only thing he regretted was that he wasn't successful.
I did what I believed was right. Or, I mean, in order to, how I felt in my conviction. Okay? Be it you agree with it or not, you know, I did what I believe I did, and if it means I go to the chair, man, I'll walk to the chair.
Luther Bass is arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and armed burglary. The case goes to trial in March of 1993. The jury deliberated over the lunch hour. Though Luther won't walk to the chair, as he told investigators, he will spend the rest of his life in prison.